When I started thinking about making this video, I Googled the phrase songwriting tips. Now, I had a pretty good idea what to expect, so I wasn't really surprised at the results. Stick around and we'll talk about it. Okay, so when I Googled the phrase songwriting tips, I was given a long list of articles and videos and blah, 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 all offering advice, flowcharts, even templates that were guaranteed to help me write a good song or the perfect hit song. Now, pretty much all of this advice was based on the kinds of generic song structures that we hear in pop and commercial music day in and day out. In fact, glancing through these listings, it would be easy to get the sense that there's really only one acceptable song structure in the entire world with just a few basic design options for changing things up a bit. Now, if you want to write a pop song, that's fine. You could pretty much pick any of these listings at random and follow their advice, and you'd be okay. Fortunately, music offers a lot of other song options beyond pop song structures. Now, don't get me wrong, pop song structures are fine. I use them myself a lot. But I do get a little bit weary of them being presented as the only game in town. So what we're going to do here is look at several options for making songs or doing improvisations. And then at the end, we actually will look at pop song structure a little bit, mostly to compare it to some of the other things that we're going to be looking at. Now, you don't have to do this in sequence. There are time codes in the description box if you want to jump around. And of course, we're not going to have time to look at all of the possible song-making strategies in the world. I'm sure you have your own that are different from anything that we're going to look at here. And if you do, and you feel comfortable doing so, please think of some way to share them. Where music making is concerned, it's good for as many people as possible to have as many options as possible. Okay, just a couple of general items and we'll get started. First off, I'm a practical musician, not a theorist. So I probably won't organize things the same way an academic musicologist or theorist might. And I probably won't use jargon words the same way they do. Also, I'm going to be presenting ideas using Native American Flute, which is my main instrument. But these ideas can be applied on any instrument or with any group of instruments or voices, whatever floats your boat. Now, a lot of people suggest that the basic building block of songs is the phrase. So what is a phrase? For our purposes, we're going to think of a phrase as a coherent musical thought. It may or may not be a complete thought all by itself. There are a lot of musical phrases that seem to beg for an answering phrase, or even a group of phrases to complete the thought. We also want to be aware that phrases have an important rhythmic function, not in the sense that they have to have a strong beat, but in the sense that they help us to organize musical time. Now, already we're dealing with ambiguity here, right? Because what seems like a coherent musical phrase to me may not seem like one to you, especially if we're coming from different musical traditions. And how do we know when a phrase has ended anyway? Since I'm going to be playing today on native flute, most of the phrase endings that I play will be signaled by melodic and or rhythmic events, or simply by me taking a breath. In some traditions, the ends of musical phrases are signaled by particular chord changes or the end of a rhythmic cycle. But however we decide to articulate phrases, whatever tradition we're working in, phrases can be put together to build larger structures, like songs or parts of songs. And that's where the real fun begins. American classical musical composer Roger Sessions, whew, that was a tongue twister, wasn't it? Roger Sessions once suggested that once you've done something, your options are actually fairly limited. You can either do the same thing again, let's call that repetition. You can do the same thing but in a different way. Musicians call that variation. Or you can do something else. Let's call that contrast. Now, I'm not sure you can even actually do repetition, especially if we're playing live on real instruments or using our real voices. It's almost impossible to play something exactly the same way twice. Intentional or not, there will be at least some slight variation there. Now, contrast is really, really useful, but too much contrast can cause our song to lose focus and even cause confusion for our listener. So variation becomes very, very important. One way to bring focus to our song is to try to make as much music as possible from as little musical material as possible. Good ideas are hard to come by. We don't want to waste them, right? So, using the smallest amount of material that we can will help bring focus to our song, and looking for ways to make variations of that material will bring continual freshness. Okay, here's a simple example of what I'm talking about. As always, I am using a medium A Native American style flute, so if you have one, grab it. You can try this out too as we go along. As always in these videos, I am using no processing whatsoever on the flute sound. No reverb, no delay, not even any EQ. Just straight up flute sound, straight into the mic and straight to you. This flute was made by Colin Peterson at Woodland Voices. Musicians sometimes use the word motive to mean just the tiniest little kernel of an idea, even smaller than a phrase. So what I'm going to play is a simple little 3-note motive on the flute. I'm going to start on the bottom note of the flute, all holes covered, and all this motive is going to be is to walk 2 steps up in the basic scale of the flute. Now, usually a motive will have some kind of rhythmic identity as well, but for now I'm just going to make all of the notes pretty much the same duration so that you can just really focus in on that pitch sequence. Here it is, a 3-note motive. All right, now I'm going to vary that motive in the simplest possible way. All I'm going to do is start 1 note higher on the flute and then do the same thing, walk up 2 steps in basic scale. So instead of starting here on the bottom note, I'm going to start here. So we now have a motive and a variation of the motive, a simple variation of the motive. Now I'm going to try to combine those 2 motives, give them a little bit more rhythmic identity and variety, and shape them into a phrase. So we can think of that as a phrase, and hopefully the use of that simple motive gave it some coherence, but looking for a way to vary the motive gave it a little freshness as well. Now, this is a phrase that did not sound complete at all on its own. It kind of wants a response. So I'm going to make a responding phrase using the same motive, except I'm going to turn it upside down. So instead of going up 2 steps, I'm going to go down 2 steps, and I'm going to start a little bit higher up on the flute. I'm going to start all the way up here. It'll sound like this. So another variation of our basic motive, and I'll bet your ear can already guess what's coming next, right? Another variation of the motive that will take us back home to our starting place. It'll sound like this. Let's combine those last 2 motives into an answering phrase. All right, now I'm going to try to combine those 2 phrases into a simple 2-phrase song. be a simple little song all by itself, but it could also become a segment of a larger song if we wanted it to be. Now, I'm going to play that song, or some version of it. It'll probably be a little bit different at least, one more time. And what I'd like for you to do this time is to trace the shape of the song with your hand. So you can kind of move your hand through space to represent time, move it up and down as the pitches go up and down, and see what kind of shape your hand traces. It was an arch shape, and it was a pretty symmetrical arch shape. The first phrase went up, the second phrase came back down to where it started from, and the phrases were pretty much the same length. Now, this kind of highly symmetrical arch shape is a very, very typical pattern in Euroclassical music and European-style folk song. Sometime when you have a chance, imagine through the song Amazing Grace, for example, and you'll see that it's made up entirely of symmetrical arches, and all of its 4 phrases are the same length. That is a kind of a clue that its origins are really in European musical traditions, even though it was probably made somewhere in the Appalachians here in the Americas. You know, I should maybe say Amazing Grace as we have it now. That the origins of that melody are so mysterious that it's really impossible to know what it might have sounded like when it first happened. Alrighty, let's take the very same motive that we used to make our tiny little 2-phrase song, and let's make a song with a different shape that's guided by a different musical tradition. This time our model is going to be powwow drum songs, and to save time rather than walking through all the steps of making this song, I'm just going to play it, and you can trace it in the air if you want to with your hand to see what kind of shape results. Now, some people suggest that a lot of our powwow drum songs have kind of a cascade shape, especially the ones that come from some of our plains cultures. So see if that makes some sense to you. This time I'm going to be starting near the top end of the flute range, and the first use of the motive is going to be the upside down version of it. All right? See what you think. Okay, so this song is more elaborate. It has more phrases, but they are asymmetric phrases, meaning that not all of the phrases are the same length. And this song was most definitely not an arch. It kind of came down for a bit, wobbled back up to where it started from, and came down again. So you do get kind of that sense of a cascade. Now, those repeated notes at the bottom end of the flute helped to signal the ear that the song is ending, not unlike the way honor beats on the drums help dancers to hear that, okay, this push-up of the song has ended and there may be another one coming or there may not. Right? So this kind of balanced asymmetry in a song is something that's really typical traditionally for a lot of the music making among a lot of our indigenous cultures here in the Americas. And it's a really different shape from what we heard with the arch structure, which was very, very symmetrical. And the arrival at the end of the arch, we kind of expected that. And it was very satisfying when it happened. Now, I maybe should point out at this point that hearing structure, musical structure, relies on musical memory. And that relies on paying attention. So it's a different way of listening maybe than just letting the nice pretty sounds wash over us. And it may take a little practice if you're not accustomed to listening that way. Now, both of these were really, really simple songs and nothing special, but hopefully they gave us a little bit of insight into some basic design ideas for making songs. For my ears, the arch-shaped song feels a little bit like walking through a formal garden, and the cascade-shaped song felt a little bit more like maybe walking through the woods. High degrees of symmetry are usually a signal of a particular kind of human intervention, an attempt to control an environment rather than be a part of it. No organic system is entirely symmetrical. Look at any tree. It's not perfectly symmetrical, but if it wants to be standing, right, if it wants to keep standing, it needs to be balanced in the place wherever it happens to be growing. Now, it's easy to take these things a little bit too far, but I do think that sometimes musical structures reveal a little bit about the worldview of the people that are making the music. The arch structure gives us a real clear sense of beginning, middle, and end. It's a little bit more closed structure. You can't just kind of pull it apart and do other things with it without really disrupting that basic shape. The Cascade song felt a little bit more open in the sense that you kind of have an idea you could lengthen it or shorten it a little bit, maybe even swap a phrase here and there without disrupting its basic shape too much. So there are those differences between those two structures as well. Here are a few more ideas for distinctive song shapes or improvisation strategies. I call the first one vining because it kind of reminds me of how vines grow. You know, they just kind of keep twisting around and turning, and you never know quite where they're going to go next. So the idea here is to play a phrase, any phrase that comes to mind, and then take some small part of that phrase or a motive from that phrase and make it the beginning of your second phrase. The second phrase then can be a variation on the motive, or it can be new material, whatever your ear wants to hear next. And then repeat that process, phrase after phrase after phrase, until it feels like the song wants to end. So I'll give you a few phrases as an example. I doubt that the song will feel like it's ready to end, though. Again, the phrases don't all have to be the same length. They can be different shapes. They can have different rhythmic identities. It's really whatever you want to do with it. What I like about that is you know when you're starting out, especially if you're doing an improvisation, you have no idea where you're going to end up or exactly how you're going to get there. Now, this next device has been used for a long time by a lot of native flute players. I've used it a lot myself at powwows and other outdoor events where there are lots of trees around, and we simply call it playing the tree line. So to begin, pick a tree. Pick any tree, right? And let the shape of the tree suggest musical phrases to you. Maybe there's a squirrel running up the trunk, maybe there's a bird singing on a branch, or maybe the wind is moving the leaves in a particularly nice way. You can grab onto those for musical ideas as well. And then as you move along in the tree line, just let the tree line guide you. Right? Maybe if you run into a particularly tall tree, you can move up higher in the range of your instrument. In some places, you can actually do this for a full 360 degrees and get back to where you started from. And if you happen to find yourself in a city instead of in the woods, you can actually play a skyline pretty much the same way. Here's a photo of a nice tree line. If you want to hit the pause button for a bit and try it out, feel free. Okay, we have time for one more, and then we really do need to get on to pop song structure a bit. I call this idea couplets, and there are some cultures that use some form of this in some of their music making. The idea here is to use pairs of phrases consistently, just like if you're writing poetry in couplets, really. And the second phrase should be a variation of the first. And you just continue adding on pairs of phrases until the song feels finished. So I'll give you a few sections, a few couplets as an example, but again, probably this song won't feel like it's really ready to end. You get the idea. If you want to hear a particularly beautiful example of this kind of song, check out the track Daybreak Vision from R.C. Nakai's wonderful album Canyon Trilogy. The entire song is built out of couplets except for one three-phrase group. So see if you can spot the three-phrase group. There are so many places where you can get advice about how to make pop song structure that I'm not going to go into details here. I'm really more interested in comparing it to some of the other things that we've been dealing with. Now, there's a lot of music on the planet, a lot of very, very beautiful music that does not rely on a strong beat at all. And even when there is a beat, those beats can be organized in a multitude of different ways. Pop commercial music almost always has a strong beat, and it will almost always organize those beats in the same way. Phrases will also be organized in a very, very consistent way. The essential model for pop song structure is European classical music and light opera from the mid to late 1800s, and those structures became normalized by colonialism and industrialization. I've talked about that process in other videos, so I'm not going to go into it here. But since it's based on a European model, we should expect a high degree of symmetry, and that's exactly what we get. The typical pop song template will tell you to organize your song into verses and choruses. And you can have an intro or an outro. You can have maybe a bridge for variety. You can have a ramp up into the chorus to build some excitement. But what's really striking is that all of these verses and choruses and other little bits, they all essentially have the same shape. It's kind of like having a Lego set that only has square blocks. Now, the pop song template assumes that your beats are going to be organized into patterns of 4. So when we listen to a song built this way, we're always going to find ourselves counting 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It will then tell you to have 4 bars to the phrase and 4 phrases in a verse or chorus. That's why people are always talking about 16-bar verses and choruses. Then you're given instructions about how to make melodies and rhythms and lyrics that you can pour into that little mold. But of course, all of those melodies and rhythms are going to have to be able to fit into the mold. Clearly, if you take this process to an extreme, you're going to be producing cookie-cutter songs. The genre won't matter. It won't really matter about the content that you're filling this up with. They'll all be the same. And the danger is that the differences between the songs will become pretty superficial, kind of like whether your cell phone is gray or blue. It's kind of an industrialized approach to songwriting, and it's been brought to us by the media companies that basically want to sell us something more than anything else. Now, these templates work perfectly well, I suppose, and they will produce hit songs, especially if you have a market-tested delivery system and a massive advertising budget behind it. I exaggerate to make a point, but only a little bit. I like using food as an analogy, because I like food. For me, there's a lot of pop music and commercial music that feels like eating at a fast food restaurant. Think of your favorite fast food chain, if you have one. It doesn't matter whether you go to it in Orlando, Florida, or San Francisco, California, or some small town in the middle of Wisconsin. It's going to look the same, it's going to smell the same, and the food is going to taste the same. I don't care what special sauce you put on it, a fast food burger is still a fast food burger. And in a lot of pop music and commercial music, that special sauce might be the looks or personality of the performer, some novel synth sound, or maybe the skimpy outfit the dancers are wearing. But at some point, the songs themselves pretty much become interchangeable. They don't make a difference. Now, we can all think of exceptions, of course, but a lot of times those exceptions tend to prove the rule. The cookie-cutter approach to music making is a problem no matter what genre or style you might be working in. But I find for me, no matter what the genre or style, the music that I tend to really connect with reminds me more of, like being at a local, really cool barbecue joint. The kind of place where they still have their original smoker from 1923 out back someplace, and Granny's in the kitchen making sauce just like her granny taught her. But somewhere, Junior's off experimenting with new wood smoke combinations on a free-range turkey. They may not be able to say they've served billions and billions of customers, but word does get around, and folks do come from miles around to sample and enjoy the unique food that they are offering. Here's another way of thinking about it. I think there is some music making whose main purpose is to be liked, especially if somebody has a desperate need to be famous or a real desire to sell you something. This is music that asks nothing of you. In fact, it will bend over backwards just to try to get your attention and maybe amuse or entertain you for a little bit. Now, there is other music making that's essentially ceremonial in purpose, and that music might be considered traditional by the people who have made it. And a lot of times it has to be done in a particular way for the ceremony to be effective, so that your preferences and likes as a listener are pretty much irrelevant. And there's still other music whose purpose is to engage you. This is music that wants you to be an active participant. It's offering you a journey, maybe to some place you've never been before. And it might even be a strange journey. You might have to listen repeatedly and carefully to start making sense of this music, but somehow, the more time you spend with it, the more beautiful it becomes to you. Now, I'm sure you can think of other purposes for making music, and these are certainly not watertight compartments. There can be overlaps. And I'm not intending to make any value judgments here. You do you. But I do think that as musicians, it's important for us to have some sense of how we fit into the larger scheme of things. And maybe every now and then take a little time to think about how and why we do what we do. And if nothing else, I hope this video has inspired you to go out and make your own unique song. And if you stuck it out this far, thanks for still being here. If you found this helpful, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. There are time codes and links and other things in the description box. And I will look forward to seeing you next time.